A pleasure to have you kick us off, and Jamie will be joining us on a panel later on in the morning. But now it is my absolute pleasure to welcome up our next speaker. Tom Howes is from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. He's going to come up, share some insight from the government, but also share what's on the future for Cyber Essentials. So Tom, over to you.
Morning, everybody. It's good to be with you today in quite an amazing setting here. I hope the thoughts I have to share match up to the building and where we are. Firstly, I want to just say thank you to CyberSmart for inviting me here to be able to share some thoughts with you on Cyber Essentials. And actually, I just want to thank a number of you here as well. I know that many of you will be actively involved in delivering the Cyber Essentials scheme. And so we are reliant on you for the delivery of it and for its growth and the success that it is today. I'm Tom Howes. I lead policy for Cyber Essentials in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. I think I want to start just by saying that Cyber Essentials is an absolute priority, more so than it's ever been for government. And that's not just here, in DSIT where I am, but for NCSC as well. And I'll get on in a little bit as to kind of why that might be the case. So I thought it might be helpful to run through a little bit of context behind Cyber Essentials. I know many of you will be very, very familiar with it. Some of you may not be. So conscious that I will be slightly preaching to the choir for many of you, but I think important nonetheless to go through this. Before that, if I just take a further step back, I've got another quote from Richard here. So placing Cyber Essentials just within that broader cybersecurity environment and the broader kind of situation that we're in right now, I think over the last 6 to 12 months, I would say, NCSC are increasingly transparent about the situation that we currently face and the increasing gap between our economy's cybersecurity posture and the increasing threat that we face. So, it's a widening gap, and I think with Cyber Essentials and with many of the other things that we do and the other tools that we have a lot of the tools and resources that we need to actually bridge that gap quite considerably, but it's simply a case of how do we get organizations, businesses, charities across our economy to actually start to do some of those things. For those that don't know what Cyber Essentials is a government certification scheme that focuses on helping organizations implement fundamental technical controls. We see it as the baseline in cybersecurity that organizations need to be able to protect themselves from common cyber attacks. Maybe to provide a bit of context and hopefully helpful, just to kind of rewind a little bit and actually explain to you the beginnings and the inception of the scheme and why it was actually created in the first place. So about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now I think, there were a number of high-profile incidents from quite large organizations. And I believe it was Cabinet Office at the time that said to NCSC, we need you to do something about this. This is getting pretty bad. So NCSC were called in to do a few investigations and to try and see what was going on and to work out what we could do to try and help raise that maturity and prevent those attacks. When the NCSC went into those large organizations, what was apparent is that many of those large organizations had many certifications and ISOs, etc. But actually, it was really fundamental, basic controls that were missing that were the reason behind some of those attacks. So NCSC went away then to try and create a scheme and some guidance, a tool for organizations to help them put in place basic fundamental security and to try and do that in a way that cuts through some of the confusion and complexity. So the original product that was launched was the 10 Steps to Cybersecurity, and they got a lot of pushback. Saying, well, actually, this isn't 10 steps. If you actually break down the controls, it's something like 70 controls, and this is actually too difficult for us to do. So then they went away again and then created Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials was created not just to be a standard and to say this is what good looks like, this is kind of fundamental baseline cybersecurity, but it was created with an assurance layer over the top from the beginning so that organizations could use it as a market tool to be able to demonstrate to others that they have fundamental cybersecurity in place, but also that organizations can use it to try and gain confidence from others that they have also done those things. Supply chains is obviously a key theme of the day, and I'll be talking about supply chains a fair bit later today. Supply chain security is really difficult, and most organizations are struggling to do it properly. We think Cyber Essentials has a role to play here. We don't think it's a silver bullet, we don't think it's the answer, but we think it is an answer to helping organizations get some confidence and to try and drive maturity across a large proportion of their kind of supply chain. In terms of governance, just to try and help place kind of where I sit and where DSIT sits kind of within the ecosystem of Cyber Essentials. So DSIT own the policy behind the scheme, and we work really closely with NCSC, who actually own the technical standard of the scheme itself. We work really, really closely with IASME, who many of you will be familiar with, and then IASME manage a network of 380 certification bodies, including CyberSmart, and then a network of many, many, many assessors who then carry out the assessments for Cyber Essentials. We kind of see this kind of ecosystem as one kind of group all trying to work towards the same outcome. We work really, really closely with DSIT, NCSC, and IASME together, and we want to work more consistently with kind of people on the ground, conducting those assessments to be able to better understand how we can drive uptake and work better to improve the scheme. Just a few stats for you here, just to give you some kind of an insight into the growth of the scheme and kind of the current situation. So we see consistent growth, year on year in uptake. From a policy point of view, as we see the widening gap between organizations' cybersecurity and the threat, we don't feel like the growth that we have at the moment will be sufficient to be able to kind of address that widening gap that we see. So it's a policy priority for the government to be able to actually rapidly increase uptake of Cyber Essentials, which will benefit everybody here as we try and work to do that together. I think if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always had. So we now are trying to think about, well, what can we do differently? What can we try and do better from a policy point of view, but also from a delivery point of view, and working with IASME to make sure that we can see that fundamental critical increase in the number of organizations getting Cyber Essentials. I'll just skip through this quickly. I was speaking to someone just before the event today around efficacy, and trying to get data around efficacy around cybersecurity practices is really, really difficult. It's really, really difficult to prove that an incident didn't happen because it didn't happen. And it's something that we've always found difficult in government, and at NCSC have also found quite difficult to do as well. Fortunately, Cyber Essentials is one of the few tools and schemes that we have where we do have really reliable, robust efficacy data that the scheme actually works. So we have insurance data that we get from the AIG that provide the free insurance with Cyber Essentials that shows that organizations with Cyber Essentials are 92% less likely to make a claim on their cyber insurance. We also have data from St. James's Place. Many of you will be familiar with this example, but in June 2018, St. James's Place, the largest asset management firm in the UK, they work in an appointed representative model, so they have many, many, many hundreds of partners that work under the SJP banner, like franchises. In June 2018, they mandated that those partners get Cyber Essentials Plus within 6 months, or they migrate to their internal Cyber Essentials Plus certified corporate system. The result of that is that 1,700 organizations got Cyber Essentials Plus within 6 months. Which was a phenomenal kind of feat and took a lot of work from St. James's Place itself to get that done. I think more interestingly is that in the 2 years after that, SJP saw an 80% reduction in incidents across their partnership, which they put down exclusively to the fact that they had mandated Cyber Essentials Plus across that partnership, many of which are micro organizations, small firms that probably had very, very kind of basic cybersecurity in place at the time. So, we have some pretty strong efficacy data here. It's unusual to have this, which is contributed to why this is such a high priority for government. We know that Cyber Essentials works. We know it helps to protect organizations. We just need more organizations to do it. There's a couple of other data points here that I think could be, that we think are quite interesting. We did a process evaluation and an impact evaluation of the scheme in the last couple of years. Talking about supply chains, the bottom stat here, I think is really interesting for us. So 15% of organizations with Cyber Essentials mandate it from their suppliers, which is obviously great. I think more interestingly is that 1/3 of those organizations with Cyber Essentials are actively considering whether they should mandate Cyber Essentials in their supply chain. So we feel like there is quite low-hanging fruit here. There's a lot of organizations that see the value, see the benefit, and are actively considering whether or not they should start making their suppliers and other third parties get Cyber Essentials. And this is a real priority for us going forward if we want to see an increase in the adoption of the scheme as we look into the future. I'll talk about that in a bit more in a few more minutes. If we look at why organizations get Cyber Essentials, I would love to be able to say that organizations get it because they think cybersecurity is really, really important and they want to go away and get confidence that they've done some really great stuff. I would love to say that. In reality, that is not the real reason. The reason people get Cyber Essentials is because they have to. Many of which, though, that go through the process really see the benefit in doing so. But the reason they first do it is because they've been told to do it. For a contract, for a customer requirement, whatever that may be, roughly 75% of people claim that it's because they've been made to, is why they do it. Principally, government procurement has been the primary driver thus far. Most government contracts will require the supplier to have Cyber Essentials. And there's a lot of work that we're doing now to try and make sure that that is applied consistently across public procurement, and also that organizations that get Cyber Essentials for a government contract maintain their compliance with Cyber Essentials throughout the duration of that contract. Sometimes could be 5, 10 years, whatever it may be. So, in short, we know the cyber threat is increasing. We know that organizations aren't doing enough. We know that Cyber Essentials increases resilience and increases organizational security. And we know that organizations get Cyber Essentials because they're required to. So the common sense conclusion to that is we need to increase requirements for Cyber Essentials across our economy if we want to see people increase adoption of that. So how can we increase that uptake? We have a few kind of core pillars that we work against from a policy point of view to try and increase uptake of Cyber Essentials. One of those is increasing awareness. But as anyone in the room here will know, just because somebody knows about something doesn't mean they'll do it. It's just a part of that process and one of the steps that people need to go through to be able to actually go through that journey of getting Cyber Essentials. We need to create, as a government, robust incentives to incentivize people to actually get the scheme and to go through the scheme and to get certified. And then where organizations want to get certified, we need to make sure that there are enough support mechanisms to help them do that. We know that a lot of small organizations really, really struggle with cybersecurity. They struggle because it's difficult and it's intimidating. And where we have support mechanisms through certification bodies, through MSPs, through other partners to be able to help organizations through that journey, we think it's an absolutely critical step to be able to actually drive adoption of the scheme at scale. So many of you may have seen, we put out some comms materials over the past 6 months to try and increase awareness of the scheme, make it a bit more accessible. We've created comms assets that we have been sharing widely, and there's a real push over the next 6 to 12 months to try and increase that and to increase our kind of level of activity in the comms space to try and drive awareness of Cyber Essentials. We're doing a lot of work around accessibility and trying to make sure that there are support mechanisms. Some of you may have heard of the Pathways scheme. Actually, can I have a show of hands for anyone who's heard of Pathways? Okay, most of you haven't heard of Pathways. So the Pathways scheme, we know that many large organizations really struggle with Cyber Essentials. because it's very binary. Cyber Essentials tells an organization you have to patch your systems within 14 days. For large organizations, I find this really difficult sometimes, and there's lots of nuances there to do with that. So where there are complex systems, and usually in large organizations, we're exploring whether there is an alternative route for organizations to be able to demonstrate that they meet the same outcomes of Cyber Essentials. This is really complicated. It's being led by NCSC, and it's been kind of years in the pipeline because you have to create testing scenarios, et cetera, but we think this is a really important step. We want to maintain a real positive sentiment around the scheme, and where there are challenges to organizations being able to get it, we need to make sure that they're addressed. So that is one thing that we're working on. We have the Cyber Essentials Readiness Tool, which helps organizations to be able to work out, actually, where am I in relation to the Cyber Essentials controls and what do I need to do? Recently, IASME launched the Supplier Check Tool, which will allow organizations to be able to, in essence, lift and dump up to 5,000 suppliers in one go to be able to see which ones have Cyber Essentials, when is their certificate up for renewal, when did it lapse, et cetera. To be able to more easily kind of audit their supply chains, to be able to see where they are Cyber Essentials compliant. So here's just a few things that we're doing to try and actually embed some of those support mechanisms and make it possible for all organizations to get Cyber Essentials and to help larger organizations be able to mandate it across their supply chains. I think of most interest here, though, and a real priority for DSIT is actually around how we create incentives and how we incentivize organizations to get Cyber Essentials. As I mentioned before, historically we've done this through public procurement as the principal driver. If we solely rely on government procurement being the lever to get organizations towards Cyber Essentials, the growth will probably stay the same or similar. There's work that we can do to try and increase, consistency, et cetera. But from our point of view, unless we get larger private sector organizations, not just larger, any organization really, to start embedding requirements and expectations for Cyber Essentials across their supply chains, that's what will see the real increase and the real drive in uptake across the scheme. So we've seen that with St. James's Place. St. James's Place is quite a unique example. It's their internal network. It's not a supply chain example per se, but the principle works. Where you require Cyber Essentials, there's a reduction in incidents. And so that's something that we want to try and scale out. There's a lot of work that we do with international partners. This isn't me with a government hat on trying to, big up the UK, but this is, Cyber Essentials is world leading. The UK is at the forefront of this. We get approached constantly by international governments asking us how we've done it. What can we learn from you? We have other governments coming to us saying, we have copied your scheme and we've called it Cyber Essentials ourselves. How are you driving adoption? Because we need to copy what you're doing now, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that we do a lot. Every month we're speaking to some country about Cyber Essentials. We had one country asked if they could license it from us. So there's a real interest here, which I think is increasingly important when we look at supply chains and the global dynamic around the interconnectivity of organizations in supply chains, and trying to make sure that Cyber Essentials isn't just seen as a kind of UK domestic standard, but also has the kind of international recognition that it needs. We work a lot with regulators who obviously have kind of a significant amount of influence over their regulated entities. We're working quite closely at the moment with the ICO. Everyone knows of GDPR. Everybody knows that GDPR is about data. Not many people actually really understand GDPR. GDPR has specific requirements for organizations to uphold, appropriate cybersecurity provisions in order to protect that data. So actually in legislation, we already have requirements for organizations to do cybersecurity and to do those basic fundamental things. So we're working with the ICO to try and actually raise the profile of Cyber Essentials in that context. They're increasingly referencing Cyber Essentials in a lot of their penalty notices, and it's something that is a top priority for us in trying to get that narrative out there, that cybersecurity is already, legislated against for all organizations, and that Cyber Essentials represents that baseline of what they need to do. talking about supply chains very quickly. So we ran a supply chain call for views many years ago, and we also ask about it in the DSIT cybersecurity breaches survey. I think that these two data points are some of the most concerning data points in all of the data points that we publish in anything. Where, we talk about the number of incidents that have happened in the year and how many organizations suffered a breach, etc. The fact that only 14% of organizations review the risks posed by their immediate suppliers is really concerning. The fact that only 7% review the risks in their wider supply chain is even more concerning. If you break down the data further, that 14% number, if you break it down by organization size, it still only looks at like 50% of large organizations are reviewing the risk posed by their immediate suppliers. Now, so why is that the case? Like, why are people not managing their supply chains? Why are they not reviewing that risk? Because it's difficult. I think oftentimes where there's inaction is because there's intimidation and people are just, they don't know what to do, so they just don't do anything. I think that's generally a theme in cybersecurity more broadly. When we delve deeper into why is it that organizations aren't managing their supply chain? A lack of assurance tools, lack of capability, lack of resource. These are all the common themes that come out. So Cyber Essentials has a role to play here. It really does. Where if organizations started to expect, demand, recommend, there's a whole scale here of what they could do with it, but if they started to embed Cyber Essentials into those supply chain relationships, we would see an increase in the scheme, we would see an increase in resilience across supply chains, and the maturity baseline of the UK would increase. So there are a number of things that we've started to do. We published a joint statement with 7 of the largest UK banks at the end of last year, where they committed to exploring how they could embed requirements for Cyber Essentials across their supply chains. This has kind of resulted so far in a few different things. So one of the banks is exploring launching an ESG fund, specifically uplifting SME cybersecurity across their supply chain. One organization has gone through a funding program to try and fund 220 suppliers to get Cyber Essentials. One bank has put in a requirement for all of their conveyancers to get Cyber Essentials within 18 months, which is approximately 5,000 or 6,000. And a number of them are currently working with IASME using the supply check tool to be able to audit their suppliers and see who has Cyber Essentials. We've extended the work that we've been doing with the banks to look with other sectors. We're working with CISOs across multiple sectors to try and explore this. If we're being really candid, talking about Cyber Essentials as a supply chain tool has kind of always been there as a bullet point on a website, get confidence, give confidence to your customers, etc. It's been a real priority over the last year. But we're not 100% sure if we're positioning this correctly. Organizations manage their own supply chains, organizations manage their own risk, they have different third-party risk management processes. We can't necessarily influence those. They'll make their own choices as to how they do that. We're trying to work with them to try and uplift Cyber Essentials and the requirements for them across those supply chains. And it's a work in progress for us, as we try and work out how do we position Cyber Essentials most effectively, how do we help organizations understand how to embed Cyber Essentials into their supply chains. We're working on a playbook at the moment with NCSC that will, in essence, help organizations that are considering whether they should put Cyber Essentials into their supply chain requirements. How do you actually do that? Who are the people that you need to have on board? What are the discussions? What does this look like? There's no one-size-fits-all, which makes it quite difficult, but this is something that we're working on because we think that this is kind of fundamental to actually driving uptake of the scheme. I will leave it there, but what I would like to end on is that this is a really exciting time for the scheme. We really appreciate the support from CyberSmart, from other certification bodies, from many of you here in actually delivering that. From a government point of view, as I've said before, it's a real priority for us. We have bills that are ongoing at the moment, but you'd be surprised at how much interest there is on Cyber Essentials in and amongst all of those conversations across different government departments. I've been in the role leading on Cyber Essentials for 4 years now, and never before has there been so much interest, prioritization of it. And that's because we know that it works. And so, we would love to see a dramatic increase in the scheme. we'll do what we can from a government point of view to try and create those incentives, to try and mobilize levers to be able to help organizations, encourage them, require them to do it, because we know that it's good for them and for the UK. But obviously we will be reliant on many of our partners to be able to kind of work with us and work with us and go with us on that journey. So thank you very much for having me today. I think there's a break later on, so please come and talk to me and ask any questions that you may have, and I'll try and answer those. Thank you.